Good. Thanks, Günther and Dina. It's always good to see you. Shalom uvracha from Bloomington. We last saw one another in Tel Aviv. Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll do that again after COVID. The sooner the better. Greetings to everyone. There are people who have registered from almost 20 countries. This is the fourth webinar in this stage of our series. Next month, we will have two featuring talks by Carrie Nelson and Tammy Rossman Benjamin. We'll then take a pause in September and resume again in October for what I'm sure will be another interesting, substantial, and pertinent series of webinars with a focus on various aspects of contemporary anti-Semitism. Dina Porat is a dear friend and colleague from Tel Aviv University. She taught for many years in the history department there. She heads up the very important Kantor Institute for the Study of Contemporary European Jewry, which is perhaps the major institute for monitoring anti-Semitism on a global basis. We'll hear from her about that in just a minute. Dina Porat is also the chief historian.
Okay, Alvin, your connection seems to be slow. Okay, it's back now.
Yeah, as well as more recently on contemporary anti-Semitism. In fact, the Kantor Center has just released a new report written by her studying the recent talks about the Jewish role, the alleged Jewish role in the coronavirus within a historical setting, to be recommended to all of you. Dina Porat will speak to us for around about half an hour today on questions involving defining anti-Semitism and monitoring anti-Semitism. She's played a major role in both of those issues. And now it's my great pleasure to turn over to Dina Porat.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rosenfeld, indeed a dear friend for many years. Thank you, Dr. Ikeli. Thank you, everyone, for coming to listen. And I'm sending you warm regards from Tel Aviv. Warm indeed, 32 Celsius right now. So let me begin right away. And indeed, the topic is the challenges, the current challenges facing monitoring agencies, centers, organizations, individuals, etc. And let me begin by three very short examples. A Jew in Azerbaijan who sold everything. He's about to go tomorrow on Aliyah to Israel. He sold everything. He's sitting on the valises. He has his tickets. He has the money for the house. At night, the house is broken into. Everything is taken. And the question, of course, is this an anti-Semitic case? Or is it a crime? Is it a vandalism? It's a criminal case, or what? Muslim perpetrators are, as we can see, not being surveilled enough. And there are less surveys about them or projects dedicated to what they do. I'll speak about that later. This is only a beginning example. But the question is, if these Muslim perpetrators are not surveyed the way they should have, is it political? Is it politically correct to do so? Not to? Roger Waters, it didn't take him 1 minute after the George Floyd murder to blame Israeli police, Israeli occupation forces for having invented a way to strangle people by the neck. Okay, is this which is of course a total, is this the first, well, it's a total no, of course, but is it anti-Zionism? Is it anti-Semitism? These are really 3 examples of hundreds that I could think of, but they highlight the many challenges that face, as we said, monitoring agencies, researchers, etc. And I would open by saying that my feeling is, after having written a report, an annual report for the last 26 years, since 1994, we've been writing a report in Tel Aviv, trying to catch the picture, to depict the picture worldwide. And I would definitely say that during the last years, depicting a full picture is becoming more and more difficult and more complicated. Let me please, with your permission, divide my words into two parts. The first one will speak about what is happening on ground. What is the reality in which one tries to find and paint the whole picture worldwide. And the second will be devoted to cultural, social, even political development, recent developments that make it all the more difficult. So let me please begin with the first one, with the reality in which we act. Now, a major question is, does the Jewish people monitor anti-Semitism? A topic that is so crucial to us all. Well, the question is, of course, yes. Who does it? Many communities, organizations, individuals. Of course, there is monitoring, but let us say right away that there is no center, there is no one place in which, nationally speaking, all the data is concentrated. There is a work together on this data, assessment, declarations, etc. There is no one center. There is no one leader that takes it as his a major project. And the outcome is that not only don't we have a major center, of course, as Alvin said so kindly, we are in Tel Aviv trying to be such a center, but nationally speaking, this is not it. This is perhaps academically, monitoring-wise, this is not it. Each community and each organization have their own criteria. For years, we are trying to persuade some of the major organizations to go hand in hand with our methodology and criteria. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work, which means that what you get from, from countries, I mean, communities in the different countries, from organizations, is different categorizations. You can have, for instance, from the community in Belgium, it's open, the material is open, and you can have the data, and they put everything in it, every case, violent, non-violent, verbal, visual, etc. It's all put together. The same, I believe, is true for the community in Australia. So the end result is that you cannot compare, let's say, what happened in the year 2010 and 2019 in the UK. You can compare inside the UK because you have the former years, and inside each country you can compare. But you cannot among the countries and among the communities, because each of them has its own categorization. And this is definitely hampering, is an obstacle on the way to a full coherent picture. Moreover, sometimes there is the feeling that Jewish communities leaders, and they have their reasons. No one is coming with complaints, but are concerned about anti-Semitism and are speaking about the situation sometimes in manners, in terms that are expressing this concern, even a fear. We can hear here and there people saying, representatives of communities, etc., saying, we are living in the 30s. Kinderlach, we are not living in any 30s. We are not living in the 30s. It's not the time when a major state like Germany put all its might into spreading anti-Semitism, fostering it, inventing it. There is the state of Israel. Jewish communities are so much more active, on the alert, coming up against. We are not in the 30s. But the fact that it is being said attests to a certain need, I would say, even interest sometimes, to speak about the situation of anti-Semitism in harsh and even frightening terms. Perhaps reporting on more anti-Semitism gives more attention, more media, sometimes even more budget, but each does it on its own. I will give a few more examples. In England, in the UK, the cases are generally held by the police and the CST, but you cannot get, the CST does a great job, but you cannot have the cases. You get the numbers that they give, but not each case. In France, it's the same. The Minister of the Interior keeps it to its own and shares it only with the community, with the body, the CSPG, okay? But they don't give you any way, any entrance to the raw material. In Belgium, we said it's open. In the United States, it's open. The police does not, it does not hide or does not close the material. Canada, Australia, Belgium, every kind of anti-Semitism activity is put together, which means all in all that, to sum up this first point, that there is no center and no common methodology or categorization. Each country, each community in a country works the way they feel, and you cannot but sympathize with the way they feel. It's very easy to sit in Tel Aviv behind the desk and speak about anti-Semitism. When you live it, that's quite a different story. And so each community is going its own way, giving its own data, very hard to compare, no basis for comparison. Now, regarding reporting, that's a second point. According to the FRA, Fundamental Rights Agency, an agency, very able one that works in Vienna, it succeeded the EUMC, European Union Monitoring Center, does a very good job, and it did two major surveys, a few years apart from each other, and the surveys were conducted from the point of view of the Jews, not of the perpetrators, but of the Jews. And they came twice to the conclusion that 75% of the cases are not being reported. 75% are not being reported, which means that we know about more or less 25. I'm not speaking about the violent ones. The violent ones, we know. They are being reported to the police, to the community, but the non-violent, that are violent in their way, verbal violence, visual, horrible caricatures, threats, harassment, phone calls, insults, etc., especially, of course, on the social nets, 75% of them are not being reported. So the situation is far, far more than we can really pinpoint. Sometimes even violence is not being reported because most of this is done by a hit and run away method. Someone hits you at the dark from your back, shouts Allahu Akbar or something else, and you are at loss because you have no details to go with to the police or to the community. Desecration of cemeteries, quite a cowardly activity, no doubt. Of monuments, how can you catch them? So the problem of underreporting goes hand of 75% not being reported, goes hand in hand with the underreporting of perpetrators, of that go most always uncatched and certainly not brought to trial. It's not registered anywhere. So the picture that we have, with all due respect to the efforts of anyone involved, is far less than the full picture. Now, moreover, in Western countries, Western-oriented, I can't say that Australia is in the West, but it's certainly Western-oriented, South Africa, etc. There is good monitoring. There are tools, there are technological tools, there are contacts with police and with authorities, a certain kind of trust between the community and authorities. And so there is a detailed and good monitoring, but there are countries with no tools, not technological, not others, not organization-wise. You don't know what is happening, let's say, in all the Central Asian republics. And on top of it, there are countries where there is monitoring, but the regime wouldn't allow you to have the material, to have any access, such as in Eastern Europe today, with nationalist regimes that would like to depict the picture themselves, not to let others have the material and then depict it. Sometimes even crimes or activities, anti-Semitic ones, are written down, recorded under vandalism or under crime. For instance, even in a very well-organized country such as Germany, desecrations of cemeteries go under vandalism. And they are not registered as anti-Semitic cases, while they comprise most of the anti-Semitic cases. Now the situation is changing after a lot of hollering, but this at least was the situation. Then comes something that you all know of, But when you try to monitor, you face it much more openly. The social nets, of course, the social nets. This is the tool of today. They make every pips go by the millions all over in a second. But today you have more and more non-open social nets. You have what is called the darknet. The darknet is the net under the social known net. These are different nets. This is a fertile ground for different nets that give platform to neo-Nazis, to extreme rightists, to radical Muslims, to whoever doesn't want to be out in the open and in the light. You have Telegram, Gab, Fortune. You have 8chan that has now been changed to 8kun because it was one of the worst and it was taken off. You have the talkbacks, endless talkbacks. Now the youngsters have the TikTok. So you are facing a reality in which a lot of activity, definitely verbal one, but one that also prepares perpetrators for actual violence. These nets that I mentioned, especially this 8chan, gave platform and gave place for those who murdered in Poway near San Diego, in Church Christ in New Zealand. They are connected to each other in those sites that one normally does not have any access to. And so this, which has become really much more than before, much more intensive than before, and they improve the tools and the technology, again, it's a whole field, a vast field that you cannot monitor. There are attempts to monitor, and let us give them the credit. Our Ministry of the Diaspora developed a tool, World Jewish Congress. There is one in Australia. I believe it's Andre Oboler running it. There are technical tools that are pinpointing anti-Semitism in the social nets, but they work on Twitter, Facebook, etc., those that are on the open, not the dark ones, which is a totally different story. So, as a result, I would like to end this first part by saying that I try to share with you the frustration that we have when trying to really have a picture. The result is, or it is so much so, that the FRA, the Fundamental Rights Agency mentioned before because of its good and very thorough surveys, one day just gave up. They asked the countries and the communities for data, solid data. For years, they've been trying it. Since 2008, there was a certain regulation that was about to oblige the countries and communities to give them the data. An echtiger dog, they did not get the data. They gave up and they said, from now on, we are working on perceptions, not on numbers, on perceptions. How do non-Jews see the Jews? How Jews see the non-Jews? But regarding data, solid numbers, etc., we are giving up. And so does our Ministry of the Diaspora. Each year on January, end of January, on International Holocaust Memorial Day, they give a report. We help them as much as we can, but they give a report with no total numbers, with no conclusive numbers. Each country, okay, cases, okay. Monitoring Facebook, Twitter, etc. According to them, Twitter had close to 3 million million anti-Semitic posts only in 2019, frightening numbers. But they don't give conclusive numbers. Time is running, of course, as it always does. And I'd like to go shortly to the second part and pinpoint shortly a number of developments, recent ones again, that have made it all that we have said, the reality on ground, even more complicated. The first is that there is, in recent years, I would say 5 years, 3, 4, certainly, there is a mainstreaming of anti-Semitism, which means that phenomena that were on the fringes, the extremists, either on the left or the right or the radical most, the Islamists, they are mainstreaming, which means they are more and more getting into the normative society, into mainstream media channels. Now, this is a very good, I think it's a result of a good work of the monitoring that we have seen this happening. But please think about it. How does one monitor cases and expressions, especially expressions, attitudes, atmosphere, that are part of normative society or parts of society that are not necessarily organized ideologically, do not belong to a party, do not have an organ, a radio station, a site, as the fringes did. So it is much more complicated to monitor them. Then you have a coming back, again during the last years, of classical, traditional anti-Semitic expressions, attitudes. We are seeing again Jesus and blood labels and protocols, etc., etc. Certainly during the corona, with the poisoning of whales, etc. The traditional anti-Semitism is more and more here, but it again is more difficult to monitor because it belongs or it is expressed in large circles that you cannot follow. You can follow perhaps churches and their media channels and their channels of communication with their public, but you cannot monitor the public, and definitely it is here more. And you know who was the first to pinpoint that? We were surprised. It was the FBI. The FBI 3 years ago said classical anti-Semitism is back more than it was. Then we have the politically correct. We have this expression, biblical expression, ochel b'chol peh, which means eating with all his mouth, the mouth. The politically correct does a lot of damage, a lot of direct damage to monitoring, because people are afraid to speak out or to express their opinion. What they do afterwards or underneath is then a totally different thing. Also, you remember the first examples I gave. One of them was about Muslim perpetrators not being surveilled or monitored enough. The German police gave out an excellent report, but most on anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Semitism. Most of it was on the extreme right. Were the Muslims who are so active in schools, for instance? Dr. Ikeli, you know about it. They are not surveilled, because if they do, then the complaint, accusation against the police will be that they are racist, okay? The same goes for other countries. The ADL did an excellent job in publishing a survey, a special project they dedicated to the extreme right. But let me ask, what is now happening after George Floyd? And does the extreme right have the same impact that they had before? Or let's say a year ago? And don't we need more surveys and projects on anti-Semitism that comes from the Black community? Now you cannot say that. You cannot say that without being cancelled by culture, as goes the American expression, if I'm saying it right. So you have to have, if you want to have a picture that is not biased some way by politically correct, you need to do the surveys on all sectors, on all groups that are expressing, reflecting anti-Semitism. A last development is that anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. Remember George Waters. Is this terrible saying that the Israeli police trained the American police? Israeli police is this and American police is that, yeah, in numbers. Trained the American police in tactics of strangling people to death, Gewalt, I think that the line, which was always a fine line, between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism has been blurred, has been more blurred than before. And there is no worse proof to that than the Corona-inspired anti-Semitism that we have seen during the last few months. Alvin, you very kindly mentioned our report. If you would like, please send it to every one of the listeners. For 8 weeks, we were publishing once a week a report on this anti-Semitism. And it was so intensified, so ugly, so much coming one expression after the other for 8 weeks. And then we did a summary. The summary does not, the expressions do not distinguish in any way Israelis from Jews. We both are responsible. Israelis are Jews. We, the Jewish people, is responsible. So the line that once claimed to have criticism, just criticism, fair one, this line has been blurred, and the criticism is being expressed in anti-Semitic tones, motivations, caricatures. All Israelis look der Stirf right from the der Stürmer. Yeah. Let me end. I'm sure there will be many questions, but let me end by saying that the situation is not a good one. That's for sure. It has worsened over the last years. Violence went up at least 20%, if not more, from 2018 to 19. There are the nets, the darknets. But my appeal to you is that let us first of all see the picture in proportion, not in exaggeration and historical comparison, as it is, in proportion. Let us, Jewish and communities, organizations, leaders, work as much more together than we can. Let us see the context, the world context. We are not the only ones. We are living in a world of extremism, racism, rampant racism everywhere. And we should see where we fit, where does really anti-Semitism fit? Not to close ourselves only with findings on anti-Semitism, but looking at the general picture. Who else is being persecuted? Who else is suffering? The Roma, for instance, where racism is growing. And then work as much as we can more together, and who knows, perhaps we will succeed. Thank you.